Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPhone 12 and see how this particular phone holds up in 2025. Now, the thing I would definitely tell you about the iPhone 12 is that this is one of those devices that I look at, and I'm genuinely still pretty shocked by how good of a job this particular phone does in 2025. So the first thing to keep in mind that I'll always say is that if you want to pick up the iPhone 12 or some other phones I would recommend buying this year too, links will be down in the description below. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPhone 12, this phone first came out in 2020. So it was, a 2020 phone, and Apple was still selling it for a while after this phone got discontinued in 2021. But the thing to keep in mind here is that with a phone like the iPhone 12, this thing is about 5 years old now in this particular year. So you're just going to have to kind of keep that in mind, that this is a 5-year-old phone at the end of the day. Now, with something like the iPhone 12, the thing I actually like about this phone is the display. I actually think the display of this thing is actually pretty decent. Like, it's not too terrible. You're basically going to go through and you're going to be getting a 6.1-inch Super Retina XDR OLED display. So this is kind of like a pretty decent type of display to have inside of this type of phone, right? Like, it's not really that bad. And if you are going to go through and pick up a phone, you're not really going to be getting that bad of an experience here. So I think this in and of itself is kind of one of those things to kind of think about here, that if you're going to go through and pick up a phone, it's not a bad display. However, there's a few small minor things to kind of keep in mind here. Number one, this type of phone, it is kind of showing its age in some ways. So it's just a 60 Hz panel. Now the 60 Hz is still okay. The iPhone 16 still only has 60 Hz, but it would be kind of nice to kind of get a little bit more capability here and there. But in this particular situation, you are kind of in this, specific spot where this phone isn't really going to be giving you really like massive amounts of differences or anything like that. You're going to be in the 60 Hz panel for a little bit of time as far as we know. Now, on top of that, the iPhone 12 still is giving you flat sides, which makes this thing feel and look very, very nice. You're still going to be getting things like a lightning port at the bottom, which kind of is a little unfortunate because most phones are USB Type-C now, but still not that big of a deal. Still, things hold up fairly well. On the back side, you're getting a standard glass back with a dual camera setup. So this type of setup, for the most part, I think still looks and performs pretty well for the most part. I don't think it's like a big, massive deal here. So for starters, this type of phone is still giving you wireless charging. This phone was the first one to kind of debut with like the MagSafe mode, which was really cool. And I would still say for the most part, if you're going to go through and pick up a phone, this thing still holds up like fairly well. There's not really too many things to kind of complain about here for the most part. Of course, this thing's not like perfect or anything, but I do think if you are going to go through and like pick up a phone, I don't think this is like a super terrible or like bad option by any means. So I think from that side, that's kind of one of those things to kind of keep in mind there from the exterior. But a big thing to keep in mind here is the price. This phone is basically costing you about $250 in the used market as of this point. So that is one of those areas of this phone which is kind of surprising, because it really isn't like this super like cheap phone, but it's also not like a super expensive phone either. So I think this in and of itself is a very important thing to keep in mind here, because you can still go through, buy a phone like an iPhone 12 and not necessarily have to like spend a bunch of money for that type of device. So I think once again, this in and of itself is a very important thing to keep in mind here. If you're able to go through and like pick up a different type of phone, this phone might be the one for you, because it's not super overly expensive and it is a pretty decent price for what you're getting. And that might be a big reason to pick up a phone like this. Now on the other side, when it comes down to the camera, this phone is giving you a dual camera setup on the backside. So it's a 12 megapixel wide and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. So it's definitely not like a terrible camera by any means. And as I probably have mentioned so many times throughout the last year or so, these types of cameras still hold up very, very well. There's not really too many things to kind of complain about here. You're still getting 4K at 60 on the front and the back, but when compared to a lot of the iPhones that have came out since then, you are missing out on a few things. So number one, you're not getting any sort of like, 4K at 120 frames per second that we're getting on the iPhone 16 Pros. So if that's important to you, you are basically missing that, you're missing out on that on this particular phone. On top of that, you're missing out on things like a telephoto lens that this phone is not going to be giving you, whereas on some other iPhones, it is going to be giving you that type of capability. So if that's an important thing to you, then that might be something you might have to think about there too. Now, on top of that, another very important thing there too is with something like the iPhone's, missing features. So this thing is missing out on cinematic mode. It's missing out on like, any advancements in that area too. So that could be another area where you look at and you might be a little disappointed. So when I kind of look at the outside of this phone, are those things like big, massive deals? Personally for me, it wouldn't be a reason why I would switch, but that could be an annoyance that I would experience that some other people may experience as well. So when it comes down from the camera side, in my opinion, that kind of covers it up there too a little bit. Now, beyond that, some other big things to keep in mind here too is the fact that this phone is still supported with software. So as of this point, this phone still has software updates. It's still going to be here. It's not really going anywhere anytime soon. So because of that, you could feel still pretty good that this phone is still going to be here for a little bit of time. So you're not really going to feel like you're going to be having like a phone that's going to be like super outdated or like, super like not going to be here for anytime soon. It's still going to be here. And I think that is a very important thing to keep in mind. But when you kind of look forward, I do think a big thing to kind of keep in mind at the end of the day is that with something like the iPhone 12, this phone isn't going to be lasting forever, right? And right now, it's basically one of the iPhones that's basically like, the third in line of getting like drop supportive software. So if you wanted to keep a phone that's going to be here for like another 5 years, this phone is just not going to be giving you that, right? This phone is just not going to be giving you that type of experience. It's still here. It's still going to be supported, but it's not going to be here forever. So it probably for the next couple of years, it might end up getting dropped. So you're just going to have to kind of keep that in mind as well. In terms of battery life, this phone is still giving you a 2,815 mAh battery, which is still pretty good. That's a good size battery, good size capability there too, which is really, really nice. But again, when it comes down to it, if you're going to go through and pick up a phone, you're probably going to be experiencing a little bit of a different type of experience here because this phone isn't really going to be that great of a performing device right now. It's kind of the battery life was surprising to me because on iOS 18, this thing randomly started giving me really good battery life. And that was the thing that surprised me because when it first came out, I didn't really remember it being that great. But now it actually really, really surprised me. So I think this in and of itself was a very surprising thing going on for that type of device. So I do think this in and of itself is a very interesting thing to kind of think about here with this type of phone. So I would tell you from a battery life perspective, you're probably going to be getting maybe not the best battery life, but more surprising battery life than you would have probably expected. Also, when it comes down to the performance, this device is still giving you that Apple A14 Bionic chip inside with 4GB of RAM. So this phone is still going to be giving you like a good amount of performance and a good amount of capability when it comes down to it. And I think, once again, that in and of itself is a very, very nice thing to kind of think about. When you're getting a phone like this, you're still going to be getting a very fast phone, kind of relatively fast for how old it is. It doesn't feel super slow. The only downsides to this type of device that I've been personally experiencing is when this type of device basically comes down to the lack of 120 hertz. It makes it feel a little bit slower. But other than that, the games perform fast. It still feels like a very fast phone. And I think this in and of itself is another very important thing to kind of keep in mind here as well. So overall, I think the iPhone 12 is still an iPhone I would highly recommend people to buy. I think it still has a lot of capability, and I do think it's still a really good iPhone to buy. It may not be like the perfect iPhone, it may not be the best iPhone of all time, but I do think if you are going to go through and pick up a device, this thing is a fairly solid option. I would still recommend people to buy it for sure, and I do think it's a really good phone. The only ones I'd recommend more than this are phones like the iPhone 13, so like the 13 Pro, those ones. But other than that, I think the iPhone 12 is still a very good phone to buy in 2024 and 2025. So that pretty much covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.